Hi, everybody. Glad to be back with you. I think I say it every time, but it's still true, so I'll say it again in one of my favorite spaces in Austin. And to do this program with you, as Annie was saying, this is something that the goal of which is to talk about things that you won't find in a Wikipedia article or something else, but to really bring some extra insights. And we've done this a variety of different ways. I've done it solo, talking about different musical conventions and things. We've done, talked about recitative, we've talked about style, we've talked about all of these different things. And tonight I'm really happy to have Jennifer with me to talk about Carmen in various aspects. As Annie mentioned, you have a book coming out in the near future about this. And so this is an opportunity for us to dig pretty deep into a piece in a way that we haven't quite done in this series. And so I wanted to start just talking a little bit about, well, first of all, I do have a couple questions. Who here has seen a production of Carmen live? Raise your hand, please. Who has seen more than one? Okay, so still a lot of hands. Who has seen it in a language other than French? Okay, all right, a few. Okay, so, which is actually a legit question. It's because, of course, in certain areas of the world, especially in Germany, for a long time, especially in the smaller theaters in more provincial areas, operas were done in German. So the first time I ever saw Donizetti's L'Elisir d'Amore, it was Der Liebestrank. Doesn't quite have the same ring, but nonetheless, it was important at that time in Germany that people understood it in their native language. So, so as we get into Carmen, the basics, right? Premiered at the Opéra Comique in Paris in 1875, in March of 1875, and I want to set one thing straight, is that because it was at the Opéra Comique does not mean it was a comic opera. And because it was of the genre we know as opera comique does not mean it's a comic opera. And so this is a convention that was used, and we've talked about recitative here, right? So when we did Les Nozze di Figaro, we talked about recitative and how this is what happens between the arias and the ensembles that moves the action along, right? And then the arias and ensembles tend to be reflecting, commenting, et cetera, et cetera. There are certain genres, including the German Singspiel. If you've seen The Magic Flute, that's a great example, where we have spoken German dialogue. Is at this theater in Paris, where Carmen was premiered, there was spoken dialogue between the musical numbers. And so that's really the key distinction for opera comique. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how this opera came up. Who was Bizet at that time? He had had a couple. He had had a few operas under his belt. He was in his early 30s. And how did this story come to fruition? What did he find? How did he get this commission? How did this all happen?
Thanks, Tim. So Bizet was an up-and-coming composer. He had been a musical prodigy, so he enters the Paris Conservatory when he's 9 years old. He wins the Prix de Rome, or the Rome Prize, upon graduation. Very prestigious fellowship, so goes to spend 3 years in Rome, and then returns to Paris. By the time Carmen enters development, he had had some modest successes, more critical than commercial, with works like the Pretty Maid of Perth, La Jolie Fille de Perth, Scotland, and then just before Carmen, with the work Jamilé, which was set in North Africa, so another story of exotic love, right? Color in terms of the story, in terms of the setting, musically speaking. Jamilé had also been staged at the Opéra Comique, and so the director thought, hey, this guy has some talent, let's bring him back to do another work. Probably to their dismay, he comes back with Mérimée Carmen, which he and the librettists, Meliac and Alevi, were very excited about, but the directors of the Opéra Comique, not so much, because in addition to being a distinct genre with spoken dialogue in between arias, the Opéra Comique as a place, so if that's the genre, as a place in Paris, it was considered a theater for the bourgeoisie. This is where parents would go to make matches for their single children. So it was a family theater, right? Yeah, so you want some entertainment, right? But like not a woman being stabbed by her lover in Act 4.
That's not good for the matchmaking business,
Not,
is it?
yeah, so not good at all. But nonetheless, Bizet, Meliac, and Alevi make their case. So Carmen enters development in 1873, and there are basically 2 years of work leading up to its premiere in March 1875.
Amazing. And so I want to talk a little bit about the premiere and the reception after the premiere. Like many operas, the critics really panned it pretty heavily, right? Not all of them, but a lot of them, but not so much the audiences, right? There was some kind of catching on there, but I've learned that when critics pan something, often it means that you're doing something right because the audiences like it, and it's true. Last weekend I was conducting a program that had Beethoven's Second Symphony on it, and that's the same thing. Like, I mean, the Viennese music critics wrote awful things, like about it was just blithering mess and a dragon waiting to die in the fourth movement and like all, and this is, but it's the same thing here, that we have something that's become one of the most oft-performed operas in history and a very beloved piece, and one that, draws huge audiences nearly without fail. But why is this? What happens, and what happens in a culture like Paris in the late 19th century, where critics just have such an issue with something?
Right. So Bizet was a trailblazer. So not only in terms of his choice of source text, but also musically. So in Carmen, you have styles ranging from, I'll use Act 1 as an example, which for audience members in 19th century Paris, that music was quite familiar. So ostensibly the story is set in 1830 Seville, but musically, the score sounded very French, right? And then Carmen is the exception, but in Act 1, like she's a bright spot musically, but not sort of taking over the score or taking over the story at that point. So the way historians recount the premiere, and also people who were there, so Bizet's friends like Camille Saint-Saëns, for example, were at the premiere. So Act 1 was actually very well received by the audience, warm, noticeable applause, and then the response kind of like goes downhill from there because, right, that bright, cheerful Western European, Northern European music, right, in Act 1 is sort of moving into greater tension with the quote-unquote foreign music of Carmen, right, and the other Roma characters. But really, to your point, Tim, it was a case of audiences getting used to it more so than audiences hating it entirely. So the sales over the course of the opera's initial run in Paris, they weren't great, but they weren't terrible. Like, people kept coming back to see it. And to your other point about the critics with Beethoven's symphony, I just want to share, because I'll never get this out of my mind, one of the responses to the premiere about Célestine Gailly-Marier's performance. So she created the role of Carmen. She was a champion of Bizet, so during that 2-year period when the management was like, we don't know what we're hearing coming out of the rehearsal hall. She, who was an established star at that point, said, no, I'm behind this and we need to move forward with this production. The critic, Oscar Commettant, wrote in one of the Paris dailies after the premiere that she was moving about the stage exercising her uterine furies to seduce men, and like what a travesty that was.
Oh, that's gonna get excerpted from this video for sure. Yeah. Oh man, wow! I thought I'd gotten some weird reviews about my career, but then Jennifer, something very, I mean, as if the opera wasn't dramatic enough, and all of this goings on around the premiere, something very dramatic happened during the 33rd performance of Carmen, which was.
Yeah, so Carmen is on stage at the Opéra Comique and in Bougival, which is a suburb of Paris. Bizet was at his weekend/summer home. He wasn't feeling well. He decides to take a swim in the river, and he suffers a fatal heart attack at the age of 36. And Célestine Gailly-Marié, again, our original Carmen, she notes in her memoirs that she felt that she was seized on stage at the moment of his death, and she knew that something was wrong. So although audiences eventually got used to Carmen, right, and then we have the Vienna production in October 1875, and that's when it really starts to catch on. Bizet didn't live to see any of that.
Which is an unfortunate thing of many composers, that we really, we long to know what they would have written. Had they been with us for longer. We've talked about this vernacular of spoken dialogue. But then there was this guy named Ernest Guiraud who came along, and he took the spoken dialogue and modified it and wrote recitatives, yes, accompanied by the orchestra. Can you tell us why did he do that? So he was a protege of Bizet's, or right, a student, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. But so why the need to modify this pretty key element of Bizet's original work?
Right, so it was thought that the replacement of dialogue with recitatives would make a work that, again, needed to build an audience, flow more smoothly, and that would keep audiences engaged, and that would win people over to Carmen as a work. And then also, so we have opéra comique as a genre, and then we have grand opera as a genre, right? And it's grand opera at the time that was more traditionally sung through, and so the addition of recitatives also reconfigured Carmen so that it could be performed in houses that were more accustomed to programming grand opera.
Which was a thing, especially in Paris, right? Because
indeed, yes.
There were demands from the opera houses there who were doing grand opera that things had to be structured a certain way.
Yes.
They often were required to have a ballet. This is why Wagner wrote a ballet for Tannhäuser, so that it could be performed in Paris.
Yes.
This is, they were particular about, what they wanted to see when they were putting something on stage. So Guiraud writes these recitatives, and now we have two completely different versions in existence. And what you're going to hear when you come to one of our performances is a bespoke version that is both recitative and dialogue. And this is something that I put together about, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. I did several productions of Carmen in a row. It literally paid the rent for quite a while. And they were all a lot of performances. And so after the first couple, when I was looking to prepare the next one with this a different director, I said, I've done a full recit version and I've done a full dialogue version, and I feel like there's something in between here that we could consider. And so we took it and we really worked very carefully to look at the spots which recits work well and feel like they really fit organically, because it's also important to remember that these recitatives were written functionally. They don't have the flavor of, they were not written by Bizet, which is not that uncommon. I mean, for composers to have an assistant or a protege write recitatives for them. But it's not the same music, and it's not the same sort of feel of the orchestration. And so what you'll hear is a version that's a hybrid version. So sometimes we keep the original dialogue, or we've maybe edited it down a little bit. Some of the recitatives, when we want to move really quickly between something, and it's a short recitative, we'll do that. So I think it's a version that, and then Rebecca Herman and I, for this production, modified it even further. But I think it's something that works really well. That's an interesting hybrid of both of these versions, where you still do get the flavor of some of the spoken dialogue, but there are other moments where you can really stay in the musical flow.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's great because, while musically I've grown accustomed to the versions with recitatives, when the dialogue is cut entirely, you actually lose some of the characterization. So there's important information that's delivered in some of that dialogue. So I'm really excited about, and have been in the past, these hybrid versions that keep some of that information and some of the flavor of the characters, again, that I think can fall out with the full recit version.
Yeah. And while we're talking about productions, one other thing, I'm going to take a hard left here. Well, you know where I'm going, but they don't. But this is actually about productions, because when you and I were talking on the phone and having a preliminary conversation about this and deciding how we wanted to approach it, one of the things we just sort of got off on, we're talking about different productions we had seen, how these worked, how they functioned, what we liked, what we didn't. And one thing that we've never talked about in this series is updated productions. Ooh. So I thought it was something that, it's something that in Austin we've never really shied away from so much, if we think it's purposeful and really fits. But then there are some operas that it's very, there are hot debates about, does this work as an updated production, right? Does it work to bring Carmen into, a border town and et cetera, as it's not this production, but, productions have been staged that way. And so I want to talk a little bit about a few of the different versions that we could compare and contrast, like the brand new one from the Met this year.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then kind of dig a little deeper into maybe what works and what doesn't when we're updating any opera.
Yeah, so since Tim did a poll earlier, I'm going to do my own poll. So how many people may have seen the new Met production, whether in the live in HD broadcast or maybe you traveled to New York? So has anyone seen the new production at the Met? Okay, okay, thanks. So Tim referenced that. So Carrie Cracknell is the director of that production, and so it is transposed to a border town. There's no specific location noted in the program notes or in any of the set design, but it does suggest the U.S.-Mexico border. And the University of Texas El Paso, the Student Opera Company, did a production set on the U.S.-Mexico border explicitly several years ago. And so, I think what I look for is coherence, right? So is there a method to the madness if we consider updating opera madness, which I actually don't. I had a conversation about updates with a dear friend who is not only an opera diehard as an audience goer, he's a classically trained bass baritone, and we settled on the conclusion that the music and the story are the cake, and the setting or the production design, that's the icing. So if you have beautiful voices, right? If you have beautiful instrumentation, insightful conducting, then that's what you want in an opera. And then the updating, it's icing. You may not like the flavor, but the substance of the work is still there. But again, I think it's important to have coherence. So I think the Met production does have a coherent narrative. So Carmen and her friends are smugglers imagine this, along the US-Mexico border, right? I think there are some aspects of the staging that didn't work for me. So in Act 2, there's some lighting that really could have come with an advisory because those lights were flashing for 3/4 of the act, right? And potentially triggering. And then in Act 3, which is in traditional productions in the mountains, there was a rotating set. And God bless those singers, because I would have been dizzy if I had to perform while constantly rotating around the stage of the Met. But again, the concept cohered. It doesn't always. My regards to Barry Kosky, critically acclaimed director, but his Carmen, which I had the good fortune to see at Covent Garden in 2019, it just seemed as if he threw everything in the kitchen sink at that production. So at one point, the chorus is doing the Vogue. At another point, he's evoking Weimar Berlin. I'm like, okay, is this cabaret? Is this the 1980s and Madonna? Just like, Carmen comes down for the habanera in a gorilla suit. So, but the music was beautiful, right? I gave it a chance, and I was deep into the social media comments about the Met production, and there were lots of unhappy comments. But my thing is, don't trash a production if you haven't seen it, because these were unhappy comments about photos from the dress rehearsal, like leading up to the New Year's Eve premiere. Like, give the work a chance, go see it. And then lastly, something that I credit my work with the Austin Opera staff for making me realize. These artists, so Tim mentioned having several Carmens in a row. Agul Akmetchina, who is, she's fabulous. She sang the role at the Met. She is now singing it at Covent Garden. She'll be at Glyndebourne this summer. She has described this season as her 50 Shades of Carmen season. They're performing this work and mounting this work over and over again. Let them surprise us and delight us, and we can always learn something new about the music and about the story.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's an important point. Is Igul is a good friend of mine, and we were talking when she was in rehearsals for the one at the Met, and she was talking about that, about when you do something that that artists need to have an opportunity to explore in different directions and to look at this through different lenses. And I think audiences do too, because one of the things I come back to, or one of the things that I most love about opera and well, classical music in general, but I think opera is really good at this, is illustrating over a number of centuries that while many things have changed and will continue to change, there's one thing that remains the same, and that is the human condition. And we can see that through a variety of lenses, right? So what you're saying is it might not work to set Carmen on the moon, because that might be a little hard for us to still understand the characters, but there are different ways to look at these things, or different settings to create a conversation about, oh wow, that really struck home for me in sort of a modern way, that if it had been set in Sevilla in the middle of the 19th century, maybe wouldn't have had quite that relevance, right?
Right. And thinking about the human condition, Carmen is a story of love, of course, right? Of jealousy. It's also about self-determination, and not just for Carmen. So I have to say, I spent a lot of time not liking Don José. But you can't work on a project for 10 years, as I have with this book, and not learn the many dimensions of a character. And I think José is also, he's struggling with self-determination. He's trying to figure out what to do with his life. Something that the Act 1 dialogue reveals is that he is in the army because he has gotten into a very violent fight at home, and so he needed to leave town. What do you do when you need to leave town? You sign up, you join the army, and you get posted somewhere else. Also, his family had wanted him to be a priest, but given his violent temper, right, surprise, he wasn't really made for the priesthood. So he's sort of trying to find his way in the world. Do I love Micaela? Is it because she's brought a message for my mother? Ooh, who's this new exciting woman? Maybe I can figure out who I am via her. So again, love, self-determination, freedom, jealousy, passion, these are all things that speak to the human condition. Whether you're imagining people in a square in 19th century Sevilla, as the opening song asks us to think about when the soldiers are singing about, watching people along the square, or it's set in a contemporary context.
Yeah. Question.
Just because the last time we did Carmen, it was an updated production. If you could just reiterate that this one is not.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That's great. So this one is quite a traditional production with a lot of the flavor that you would very much expect. After trying to warm the room to updates, that's what we get.
Not this one.
Yeah, not this one. So no, this one is quite traditional in all the sense. So I mean, this. Escamillo definitely looks like a toreador from this time period, et cetera, et cetera. But let's, now that you sort of started directing us to characters, I want to talk a little bit more about characters because we're going to meet a couple of them tonight. And I think it's good to give, for us to visit a little bit about who these characters are, because we think we know these characters, right? But there's a lot of depth here, and when you have artists of great quality, they can mine these depths for a lot of detail, a lot of inflection points, and things that we might not just expect when we look at it from the outside. So let's talk a little bit about Carmen and your thoughts about this character, who she is. Does she make a journey during the piece? I have an opinion about that, but I definitely want to hear your take on this character as the iconic figure that it is.
Okay, so my hot take on Carmen. I don't think that she changes. So she's described, right, as the femme fatale. She's capricious. She's fiery. She leads people, specifically Trustee, along, but I don't think she does. So yes, musically, she is different, right? And she sticks out, for lack of a better phrase. But if you pay attention to what she sings and not simply how she sings, Carmen is constantly telling people who she is, what she wants, and what her boundaries are. And the problem is, and this, I credit the British director Mark Dornford May, who directed a film adaptation of Carmen set in South Africa. This is an update warning. And so he said the problem is not so much what Carmen does, but what people do in reaction to Carmen. After hearing her say, again, what she wants, who she is, and what her boundaries are, and then saying, okay, that's fine with me, and then deciding, oh, you know what? I really want something more. And then Carmen again reiterates in various arias throughout the work those three things. And so I think she's actually quite a stable character.
Yeah, that's my take on it too, is that, and it's, you see that from the people around her too, like in the quintet with the other smugglers, is, they're, chatting, and she, what's going on with you, Carmen, et cetera, and in the middle of the quintet, she admits that she's in love. Mm-hmm. And their response is instantly, oh my God, again, here we go, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's like, there's no surprise, but like you're saying, she's very direct about what she's going to do and what she's not going to do, how she operates as a character. We talked a little bit about Don Jose, I want to talk a little bit about Micaela, which is a character that I feel like often gets not overlooked. You can't possibly overlook this character because she's very prominent in the opera, has several scenes, has a major aria. But again, and Raquel and I have been talking a lot in rehearsal about this with our director, Rebecca, about how you really show strength in a character that can sometimes come across as a bit of a pushover. So Micaela turns up in Act 1 from Don Jose's hometown, and she's looking for him, one of the soldiers in the square in Sevilla, who's very unlucky in love. All the kids would say he has no game. Hits on her, and she's like, no, I'm looking for Don Jose. And he's like, well, I'm a soldier too. And she's like, no, but I'm looking for Don Jose.
Right.
And she's like, I have a message from your mother, and they have this beautiful duet. And so I think it's often people can see this as the girl from home, right? But she's a lot more than that.
She is. And if we think about that home, even there, we can start to see Micaela's strength. So Jose is Basque. He's from the province of Navarre in northern Spain. And remember, that our story takes place, in Seville. So we're at almost the southernmost point of Spain. They're probably closer to North Africa, even though you have to cross, right, a body of water, than they are to Navarre. So yes, she's been sent by his mother. If we think about their duet, she says, your mother and I were leaving church one day, and she gave me this charge to come and see you. She has traveled a long way to see
through treacherous territory.
Yeah, through treacherous territory. So that in and of itself is an early sign of her strength. And then by the time we get to the aria that we're going to hear a little bit later, she has persisted in, trying to remind Don Jose of where he's from, of his familial responsibility, and she's open about being afraid of, because at this point she's not in Seville proper, none of the characters are, she's in the mountains. But she's like, I have this duty. He needs to know this news about his mother. And so she expresses her fear, but she persists nonetheless. So it's it's perhaps what we might call a quiet strength. It's less overt than Carmen's strength is, but I think it's remarkable and worthy of notice nonetheless.
And then we have this other character that in the play was sort of a passing kind of character, or mention even. But part of the deal of, this is Escamillo, the bullfighter, right? So this guy comes, it's said that they realize he's coming into town, and they sing about him coming into town very vivaciously. Then he sings probably one of the most famous arias in the repertoire, the Toreador song. Kind of wins over Carmen right then and there.
Right.
But who is this guy, and why? Because he wasn't even really part of the original story. Why do we have him in such high profile in the opera, and he's actually the one standing between Carmen and Don Jose?
So we have Escamillo and also Micaela, again because of that fear by the Opera Comique directors that Mérimé's story, Bizet was working from this novella, that it would be too harsh and too tragic without some softening. So Micaela was considered a counterpoint to Carmen, and then Escamillo comes in really to offer some, it feels weird to say this in a way, but to offer some levity, right? Like the Toreador song, as Tim was alluding to just a moment ago, that's like pure entertainment value, if you think about it. It is so rousing for those who are newcomers to the opera. You've probably heard it before. And so Escamillo is an expansion of a very minor character who's maybe mentioned in one paragraph in the novella, and he's a picador named Lucas, so he's not really at the top rank of bullfighters. But again, in order to enhance the entertainment value and to soften some of the rougher edges of the story, Escamillo is added to the narrative.
And he's a superstar.
Oh, yes.
When I was talking to the chorus, I said, this is Beyonce of bullfighting.
It is, yeah,
right?
And this is why Escamillo really is the man for Carmen. because his ego can take her independence, right? And since Tim has, brought in a great contemporary pop reference, I'm going to offer another one. I would say that like Carmen and Escamillo, they're the Swelsey of the opera, right? So like Taylor Swift plus Travis Kelce.
So everybody get that? Yes. Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. Woo, Kansas City Chiefs. Hey, I'm from Kansas. We got to have one thing to hang on to. I mean, really, sincerely. I'm from Navarro. No kidding. Great. Everyone, should we hear some music? Okay. I always ask that, and I get a great. It's a great question every time because I get a great response. So the first aria we're going to hear is Michaela's aria, Jeudi. And so could you maybe introduce this aria a little bit for us, that we hear it later, much later in the opera, and give us maybe a little context for what we're about to hear here, please.
Sure. So we're in Act 3. We're in the mountains outside of Sevilla, and José's mother is not doing well. So Micaela has come to tell him that, you need to really, preferably give up your life of banditry, but at the very least, put it on hold so you can come and see your sick mother, right? So again, this is a frightening place to be. I think it's frightening for anyone, but especially for a demure yet strong young woman like Micaela. And so she is essentially saying, she's steeling herself against her fear. I'm saying that nothing can scare me. Alas, I'm still kind of scared, but I have my faith, and I know that my mission is important, and so I will push forward, even though I'm tempted not to go on. And you can really hear Micaela gaining resolve, right, and gaining courage as the aria progresses, and so that by the time we get to the end of the song, you are right there with her, and you're like, yes, Micaela, you can do this, right? So it's really a lovely piece of music.
Beautifully introduced. Please welcome pianist Kevin Miller and Raquel Gonzalez. nobody's going to leave this production early.
No.
Well, I think maybe before we move on to Q&A, we should have just a small sample of the main event.
Yes,
right?
indeed.
So please welcome, singing in the title role of Carmen for us, Cecilia Hall. There's your dessert for the evening. Yeah. No, we are really fortunate to have a wonderful cast for this production. And, you know, one of the things I love about working with a cast like this, that this cast is really ready to look at everything again. And I think that's really important, kind of circling back around to what we've talked about with wherever it's set, however it's set, is this willingness to look at something anew. And whether that's something I mentioned, you know, conducting Beethoven last weekend, but, you know, we think we know these pieces. We think we know Carmen. We think we know Bohème. But one of the great things about this is not only does it keep giving from illuminating the human condition perspective, but there's so much for us to be learning from these pieces. And I'm paraphrasing. I read this quote in a book when I was a student, and I've never been able to find it again. But it was, so I'm paraphrasing. This was the great American conductor Andre Previn, who in an interview said, someone asked him about, you know, ego and how important he was. And he said, it's difficult to become big-headed when you are working on music that is invariably better than you are. And so I feel like we're really fortunate to have these pieces like Carmen in our lives, because for you, we can create them anew every time, and also for us to find inspiration as artists to keep digging and to keep looking and to keep mining all of the wealth that is really in these masterworks. I would love for you to just say a few words about your upcoming book, if you would, and then we'll just take a few questions.
Okay, thanks. So the book really grows out of what you were just saying in terms of these these works having so much to give, no matter how much you think you know them. So I was in Paris in 2006, and I went to the movies, saw the South African adaptation of Carmen, and was really blown away. So it's set in early 2000s, South Africa. Everyone's in contemporary dress. It's sung through, they're singing in Xhosa, which is one of the languages of the Southern Cape, but the music is Bizet's score. And the juxtaposition was just so powerful that I, asked myself, like, what is going on here? Like, why was this director drawn to Carmen and moved to set it in contemporary South Africa? And why did it work so well? And so I had seen Carmen Jones when I was in college, one summer after summer school before going back to campus. I'm like, oh, what's on Turner Movie Classics? And Carmen Jones was there, so I thought, maybe there's something here, right? And so I decided to focus on adaptations of Carmen set throughout the African diaspora. So the African American community in the United States, we think about Carmen Jones, so the movie musical, which is drawn from Oscar Hammerstein II's musical. There's also a Senegalese version of Carmen from the early 2000s, and it's similar to the South African version in that it's set in contemporary Dakar, which is the capital of Senegal. There's some especially rich history there because Senegal was a former colony, or is a former colony of France, so it's a francophone or French-speaking country. And then I look at two Harlem Renaissance novels because Carmen is there, and there was actually this play that was on Broadway in the 1920s called Lulu Belle, and it really is like a thinly veiled Carmen, and so one of the novelists was inspired by that. And then I round out the book with one of my all-time favorite productions, which I hope is revived. I think the pandemic kind of put a damper on things. It's a stage musical called Carmen la Cubana, and it's set in Havana, Cuba, on the eve of the 1959 revolution. It's orchestrated, so Bizet's music, but orchestrated by Alex Lacamoire. You may know a little work that he was involved in called Hamilton. It was orchestrated for Hamilton. And that, I think, is an especially beautiful adaptation, and I loved ending the book there because the Habanera, Carmen's signature piece, essentially is a feminine version of like From Havana, right? And it is habanera, without the enye, because that gives you the pepper. And we're talking about the place and things associated with the place. And the habanera was actually a dance form that is a cultural fusion. So refugees from colonial Saint-Domingue, which is present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, traveled to Cuba. This music and dance form is created. Sebastien Iradier, a Spanish composer who travels to Cuba, hears this music, goes back to Spain, writes a song called El Arreglito, and then Bizet hears that song in Paris. So to end the work with Carmen la Cubana, which had its premiere in Paris, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just loving the synergy, felt really right to me. And again, like my central interest is, why does this story keep getting told? Why does this character continue to fascinate people? And what do we have to learn about these different places in which the story is set? And what this story illuminates about the human condition.
Beautifully. Well, there's very much to look forward to in that, and coming soon. I'm wondering if anyone has any questions for myself or Jennifer about Carmen, or about maybe something we didn't talk about that you're curious about.
So I was wondering if you could comment on the interpretations of Carmen's character and how it's evolved over time, because she can be depicted as this kind of fallen woman, a bad woman, or a slattern, or she could be depicted as an independent woman that refuses to bow to men. Could you just comment on that?
For our video audience, I'll just repeat a little bit of that. So the question is about the interpretation of the character throughout time and in different ways that different artists have chosen to portray, whether it's a travailed woman or various ways that the character can be embodied.
Yeah, so I think that it depends on a couple of things. So certainly the director's vision for the story as a whole and Carmen's place within it. It depends on the context in which the work is performed. So again, I mentioned that quote from the review in one of the Paris newspapers after Carmen's premiere, and I think at that point, and even like moving into the late 19th and early 20th century, if we think about performers like Emma Calvé, who was another noted Carmen. Part of the problem was the realism of the performance, because Carmen is not a proper woman, but if we think about what determines whether or not, or what constitutes proper, right, it's conforming to certain social norms. And in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, women were not meant to go about and choose their partners freely and reject men as if, they're rejecting a dish at a restaurant, as casually as that. So I think it depends on the historical context and the performer, and again, the director's vision for the production.
And this is a good thing that I remember, when I started really learning opera and getting to know a lot of these legacy pieces like Carmen. It's really fun to pull a lot of different recordings and hear, even if you just take the arias and hear all the different ways these have been approached, is really fascinating. Other questions? Yes.
I had heard that when Carmen premiered, or maybe when they were practicing to do the premiere, that they said one of the people, I don't know who it was, said it was unsingable.
Yes.
Did that happen?
Yes. So the question is that when Carmen was in rehearsals, one of the people involved in the production said that it was unsingable. So yes, and there were actually a number of complaints swirling around that production. So Camille Dulocle, who was one of the co-directors of the Opéra Comique, was walking by rehearsal hall, and we know this thanks to Sanson, who revealed the inside track, the gossip. He hears the music and he's like, "Oh my gosh, like what is this?" And he says, and I'm trying to find the translation in English, and he's like, "C'est de la musique cochinchinoise." This is Southeast Asian music. So it's important to remember that France at that point had colonized parts of what was called Cochinchine, then Indochine, right, what we know today as present-day Vietnam. Dulocle also was sort of bad-mouthing the production to donors, trying to get people not to come to the theater because he was scared that it would ruin the company's reputation. De Leuven, the co-director, when the commission was granted, he resigned. And then the last bit of inside baseball share is that the chorus was actually quite dissatisfied because they were expected to dance. So it wasn't just, sort of like move as if you're walking along the streets of Seville. It's like, no, we want you to dance. And they're like, that's not what we do. We're the chorus. So there are all sorts of those critiques bubbling up from within the house as the production was being prepared.
We have a very willing chorus, fortunately, in our traditional production. Good.
Well done, Tim.
Sorry, I just had to slide that in there. Okay, great. Any other questions? Yes.
So I heard one interpretation of Carmen that they described her as she's actually committing suicide at the end. I always found this strange. Can you comment on that?
There are certainly various productions of operas where the the modality of demise has changed to try and put it as delicately as possible. But I don't. You're more familiar with different productions. I've heard of this before, but I don't know specifically. I've never seen a production that has done that.
Yeah, I haven't either, I have to say. So I want to talk with you more after this event is over. The two most striking changes of the finale that I know of are the Barry Kosky production, which I mentioned, which has Carmen sit up at the end. So yeah. And then in Florence, is it the Maggio Musicale? There was a production in which Carmen kills Jose, but I don't know about the suicide. So I'll have to talk with you more, and then do some research.
We could
after
do
the
a
night.
choose your own ending of our traditional production. Yeah. We could have everybody vote at intermission. Yeah. Well, no, this is interesting. We have to find out more about this. All right. Any other questions for us tonight? Yes, please.
I was curious, given that there's so many adaptations of Carmen, if in your mind, if you thought about one that hasn't been done yet.
Ooh, good question. Oh, this is great. So, out of all the adaptations, is there one that has not been done that you think should be done? This is great.
Oh, that's excellent.
The Barcelona version.
Oh, the Calixto Betu version. So our friend in the audience is referring to a production that premiered, I think, so the Barcelona Teatro Liceo, the Liceo in Liceu in Barcelona. I think that premiered in 2011, maybe. And so that's a contemporary update that's also been staged at the Opéra de Paris several times. But I don't know, I think, so the story and potential adaptations have not been exhausted, but, I've seen, so Opera Orlando has a version that is set in Haiti during the Papadoc Duvalier regime, which I think is quite powerful. Again, we talked about the US-Mexico border. I don't...
AI Carmen.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
That's a way to end the evening. Yeah. Well, I want to big thank you, Jennifer, for being here and sharing your wealth of information and knowledge so generously, and we look forward to the book. And a big thank you to our performers and to all of you for being here. And please hang around and chat and commune afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you.